That was fun. Okay, so now that we know a little bit about compositions and what's appealing in a composition, how to break up a composition, that sort of thing, and within a frame, let's start figuring out what a story concept is, okay? So let's talk now about how do we start to develop a story, tell a story in a single frame. That's what session number 2 is all about, so let's get into it. Hi, everybody. Okay, let's get started. So we are talking about creating a story concept. We've talked a little bit about composition, so we can get some of those things out of the way. Designing a frame, right? I'm going to talk about kind of how we should start to think about story within our drawings. Because oftentimes we don't nearly enough. I mean, I started this way. Like many of you, I love to draw characters more than I like to create scenes, and a scene really suggests that there's some story going on, right? There's a background and the characters interacting with the background and creating a scene, and there might be other characters where you get story. So I started drawing out just like this. Say I was drawing a little boy character that's a frog or something, and I'm sketching in my sketch pad, right? But I didn't know what to do with him. So as I started really thinking about story, I started to really think about creating more scenes. And we're going to be more successful as storytellers and as artists in general if we could start implementing story early on. Not just drawing characters, not just drawing backgrounds, but everything together. So let's come up with a story for this character. How about this? This story... Well, let's say maybe this idea is he's this cocky ladies man, right? He's a real flirty kind of guy. He's walking down an urban street and maybe flirting with whoever he sees. There we got a simple story set up, right? It's kind of Saturday Night Fever, but with frogs. I'll just say, I always like putting an animal into a story and stuff and just changing it up a little bit. So the first thing is that design that we created of this character really didn't have any purpose. He's just this smiley standing pose, and it doesn't really say anything about this character now that we want to have kind of a cocky walk to him or something like that, right? He's got a lot of confidence. So let's start with that. Now he's got a pose that serves the story concept. And I kind of wrote down here about like who he is. He's cocky, he's confident, he's walking, so he's in a walking pose, smiling. Some of this is mechanics based on the story concept. I want him walking, so I got to put one leg in front of me, the other. But I wanted him coming towards us a little bit, and I'll show you why in a minute. I'm already starting formulating the other elements of the background and the design, but I started this way. Usually I'm doing this all at once, though, but just for this, I've broken it down into let's redesign the pose so that it has a little more storytelling into it. He's looking at somebody, he's doing the 6-shooter kind of thing. His half-lidded eye expression makes him kind of feel cocky and sure of himself. But let's widen out that lens a little bit more and introduce more story elements of the background. Remember we said we wanted him on a street scene, so he's walking towards us. So I put in, this curbs and, and the frame, I'm thinking that he's kind of split right here, but I'm going to develop that more as I put a frame around this. I added this little girl character. She's walking, she's waving, she's sitting on a porch here of maybe an apartment. It looks like kind of a New York kind of city or something. I placed in a horizon line that's pretty low, and we'll get more into that in a moment, but that horizon line being low means that we're kind of looking up at him. So our camera is now lower and we're looking up at him. That gives him a confidence and a cockiness, right? Because I chose that lower horizon line, it means that we're going to see more of everything else above the horizon line, the sky, the buildings. I've got a lot of shapes, and I've kind of chosen a wide angle lens, so I've done kind of a cartoony bend to the buildings and everything, and it all kind of helps to create a radius a little bit, like almost he's the center of his world, right? This all serves the storytelling, this thinking that I'm with the lower horizon line and how everything's kind of curved in towards him, and it creates kind of a nice showcasing for him here, almost a framing with the buildings and the street. but I'm not done yet. This is just kind of a rough here. Let's add more elements to it, but let's start by putting a frame around it. And as I do that, I start to really showcase now what I want to show. So by putting this frame in, you could tell he's not in the center of the frame anymore. I've kind of moved the frame over so that I can showcase the buildings over here more. This girl character, she has a little more purpose in the frame by giving her some weight in the frame composition. He's going to be a little bit more in the thirds. So remember, if we break our frame up into thirds, we're starting to see now that she's in the thirds and he's in the thirds, but particularly him. But this is where in Photoshop I can augment this a little bit more, and you can see I'm going to change this even more now as I refine it. So I'm going to enlarge him. Let's just take off the old one. Now in this newer frame, I've started to redraw some things. This is the stage where as artists we make refinements, because we can always make new iterations, we can always make things better. And my goal with this illustration is to communicate as clearly as possible, not only from a good design, appealing design, but also as a storyteller. So I'm really pushing him forward now. I've made him larger in the frame. I've also applied my thirds frame in the green lines here, just so I could see how things are lining up with then breaking up our overall frame into thirds. And I'm seeing now by enlarging him, not only am I putting him forward, I'm creating more depth in the frame by putting him more forward, by making him larger than her. It's almost like he's past her already and kind of looking back now going, I'll come back for you later, chickie, hey, hey. You know, that kind of fun thing. He's got a little fun walk to him, same pose, but he's just larger. And now see how his eyes are kind of just hitting that cross section in the thirds here. She's not perfect in the thirds. I'm less concerned with her. I want to make it more about him as a focal point in the frame. But we can see how I've really tried to connect their eye line here, her pupils looking at him. This is really important in animation, that the pupils, if you have two characters and they're supposed to be looking at each other, make sure those pupils line up so they're really checking each other out and looking at each other. So I'm probably going to tie this down at this point. So I've already done this, but this is where I'll make even more refinements. And then I've chose to make this an ink drawing. And so let's go to the final here. I've made some other refinements. I've added some tones and shadows here. You can see by putting this mid-tone behind him, he's popping off the background a little bit more. It also helps to design-wise. Look at this nice, the negative space that we see. We're getting a nice kind of curved line through here. Our eye comes into the frame, comes down to her. We start here though, because there's a lot of nice contrast elements. We'll get into that. But there's a lot of things that are working to really connect these two characters. His pointing fingers, of course, her wave here, her leaning forward. Look at this nice dynamic of her leaning forward. That's kind of pushing our eye in towards him. You want that kind of circular motion within a composition. We want it to start with him, but we want to always come back to him too. We want to always have the audience's eye moving through the frame in a graceful, comfortable, well-organized way. Because we, as viewers, I mean, you know how it is on social media, we're boom, 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 looking at so many images. You want to capture and in one frame be able to go, here's my storytelling. You get it? You see it? And here it is. All right. So within this session, I also wanted to talk about horizon line. We talked about it a little bit with that this kind of Diggum Toad character that we just saw, and where I kept my horizon line pretty low. So I often think about like where my camera position is, or kind of what my viewpoint is within the frame. I start to think about that early on too as a process when I'm thinking about my story concept that I'm going to illustrate. So horizon line is pretty core for me too in how I'm thinking about my composition. But what is the horizon line? So it's basically the edge of the earth when we look out into the horizon. Or if you're in an interior, if you're inside of a house or something, often it could be like the floor plane could be the horizon line, or a suggested horizon that we don't even see because we're indoors. So there's a lot of ways of thinking about that. This is kind of really important for perspective too. I'm not going to get so deep into perspective. There's videos you can rent and things, books that you can buy, and all kinds of information about perspective. But the horizon line is really core for that because everything works off of that horizon line oftentimes. So, but it breaks our frame up and it establishes our point of view. Okay, so oftentimes when we first start as artists, and when you're a kid, what's the go-to thing that you draw? A little house on a hill or on a horizon line, and there's a sun, and it's a smiley, happy sun or whatever. And so I've done that here. But oftentimes when we begin to think about horizon lines, we break up we put the horizon line like right in the middle of the frame. I can't tell you how many illustrations and paintings I've seen that are just like broken up that way. It's boring. It's not great design. You want to go either higher with the horizon line or lower in some way. Again, you're breaking up that rectangle or whatever your frame composition is. Try and do it in a dynamic way or a little bit pushed. You don't want to do this whenever possible. There's always, with any kind of rule that I give you, I'm just going to say right now, there's always examples where it works great or it is the right choice. But I would say in general, try and move that horizon line so it doesn't split your frame in half. Here's a similar illustration of a house and a sun and all that kind of stuff, but with more dynamics to it. There's depth here. We've lowered the horizon line. Look at how low it is now in the frame. So it makes it more about the house. I've been able to kind of like enlarge this house. It gives it maybe more grandeur to it. We're kind of looking up at the house too. See how this roof line comes down now? We're seeing underneath the roof a little bit. That makes it more dynamic. There's kind of a pinched feeling here too of the walls. I've added some trees, one tree behind it, which makes the house kind of pop forward a little bit. There's a foreground tree here. Look at the nice dynamic of the negative space now working around here, and in the positive space too, how it works together. This is a much more well-balanced composition. It's also much more dynamic. If this was animation or it had movement to it of a character coming out of the door and kind of working towards camera. A lot more things going for this. So in good design, it's about ordering your elements in a frame in an irregular way. You want things to be off balance. You don't want things to be so static and boring and cut in half and all that kind of stuff. So really you're trying to be like balanced, but in an uneven way. Let's put it that way, okay? Start thinking that way. Here's some more examples of moving your horizon line within a frame that can give you some really good outcomes here. There's this great one where we go really low. So if you're doing a film or an illustration or a concept that's like Ratatouille or something, and it's based on a cat or a mouse, and they're in a real world environment, you want to be down at their level. So a lower horizon line could really put you where you're looking up at everything else around us, but we're right there. Lower with our camera or with our framing. Look at this, more of a what they call a Dutch angle. I guess it started in Holland, I don't know. But this more askew kind of breaking up of the frame at a diagonal. And we're also still pretty low with it, so we're looking up at this imposing character, and we're here right there with the victim, looking over their shoulder. Here's a higher horizon line, and what that does for an exterior is that it makes it kind of a vista shot. We can see a lot of kind of the earth, the planet, the location, right? And for something where you want to stretch out shadows at dusk and create an impactful image there, it works great. I also have the horizon line. If this was broken up into thirds, I have the horizon line cutting right across the top third of the frame. This is this is more of a split kind of composition with a dynamic element of these lines all working towards a horizon line that is way up here off frame somewhere. So we don't see the horizon line in frame, but it would be like way up here, and all these lines would work towards it. But it gives us a nice impactful shot of seeing a rocket taking off in the frame. So sometimes you don't have the horizon line in the frame. That works too. Also know that moving the horizon line not only adds to improved design, but to the storytelling as well. So it gives you an impact, an emotional feeling too about where the camera is. We're going to get more into that as we go into the next element. And let's go into assignment number 2. So as we conclude this session about horizon lines and composition, I'd love for you to just fill in 2 rectangles again with some kind of composition. This could be more pictorial, so a landscape or something like that within this frame. Create a quick little sketch that has a horizon line. And I've kind of notched in where the thirds are, so you can kind of suggest it within that if you want to help bring in the thirds concept to make sure that there's balance, but also not evenly balanced, and create a design composition. I'll give you a moment here, and then I'll take a stab at it myself. Okay. All right. Let's see what we can come up with here. I'll just do one in this area here. Let me make my pencil a little smaller here. I'm just going to rough something in here. You know what? I'm going to do kind of a foresty thing. I like the verticals that come from trees. So I'm already starting to think of like a large tree breaking up the frame and some smaller trees over here. I'm going to put my horizon line pretty low. And it's also going to have a little curve to it because when you're out in the woods, you know, there's little hills and things like that. It's not pavement, so it's not totally flat. And I can have one hill that's in front of another, and that adds to an interesting dynamic right here because we see, you know, one shape coming into another shape here, which is nice for this area. I'm going to put in some branches to break up the frame a little bit too. I'm not great at, it's taken me a long time to learn how to draw trees. I gotta say, I don't feel like I'm great at it, but there's some classic trees in different movies like Snow White and things like that. But the nice thing about trees is you can break up your space in the frame too by creating kind of a canopy of leaf shapes and bushes shapes. Like I could create other shapes here that are basically bushes, and they're in the background. I'm going to create a focal point within the thirds here of a character in this area. See, I'm thinking about my thirds here. I should have done that on a different layer. I'm going to erase those. Okay, so let's just put a bunny in here or something like that. So let's make this shape that I'm thinking into a compositional character. Whatever a bunny looks like. And this is where I would do some character designs before I really put them in there. But now we have a background tree that's pointing directionally right into him, and I want to have some elements maybe of let's do some kind of soft leaf kind of thing that maybe directionally works towards the bunny. Instead of this bushy character or bushy kind of thing. This is from the trees. So trees, trees, trees. So I'm kind of creating a space here too that could be broken up too with really soft trees in the background. These are like distant kind of things. I could even put in another hill kind of back here that could really work towards pointing out our character. And then if we were doing this with tones and shadows and stuff like that, we could really create a pull of light here by making this pretty soft and this a little bit darker, and really making him light against dark by darkening our background around him, and that's going to make him pop more. And when I say pop, that means he's going to stand out more in the composition. Our eye is going to go to him as a focal point. These are going to be soft, and then we'll go dark again. And then we can go really dark with our foreground element. So I'm not even worried about where the frame is necessarily. I know that I can break this up. I'm going to go a little softer, a little more translucent, lighter. Putting in some big shapes now, right? We're making it kind of a spooky scene too. I am kind of making it dark. So foreground elements tend to be darker, midground like a medium value, and then particularly light in the background. You know, without doing a value study here, this is just kind of quick. So most things are going to be kind of grayed out here. We're just going to get a sense of trees in the background. It's a busy forest. And the more I can add a little bit of tone, a little bit of value to these trees and stuff, the more our eye is going to go to our rabbit character, who's maybe there's some light coming through here, through the trees. And it's creating a little bit of a pool that he's in. That's also a real directional thing, of course. Do this God light coming down on him. Interesting. And then lastly, he could have a nice shadow here. There we go. So we got some nice vertical elements to this composition. We've broken up with a low horizon point, and we've got a focal point there on our little bunny in the forest. Very rough. That's all I'm talking about for this assignment. Just do something rough and play around with some kind of a pictorial element that has a horizon line. Okay, thanks for joining me for session number 2, guys. Keep drawing.